Hello everyone, and welcome to another video with Daddy Daughter Card Breaks. My name is Clay, Lucky is with me, and today we are starting a new series called Top 10 Tuesday, where we are going to give you what our opinions are, mine and Lucky's, of what the top 10 cards or sets or something like that are of a particular time frame, maybe of a particular sport, something of that nature. But today we are going to start with the most iconic cards of the 80s, the baseball edition. So these are my opinions of, this is an official disclaimer by the way, these are my opinions of what the top 10 most iconic cards of the 1980s were. Sometimes when we think of iconic cards from the 80s, something that may be at that status now may not have been then. Something that may have been in that iconic status then may not be now. An example of that would be like the 89 Upper Deck Reverse Negative Dale Murphy. Now, while it's still a nice card to have, especially in like a PSA 10, it's not as sought after these days as what it was back then. So these, once again, just my opinions of the top 10 most iconic cards of the 1980s. I'm going to start with some honorable mentions. The honorable mentions, they would definitely qualify as iconic cards of the 80s. But one reason why they didn't make the list, the main reason why they didn't make the list, is because they were just so far out of range for someone who, for me at that time, in that age group, you know, in the 80s, I was 5 to 14. So, 1980, I was 5 years old. 89, I was 14 years old. So, there was no way at that time I could have afforded to get these cards. But as far as just like iconic cards, they're still definitely iconic cards from the 80s. So, we're going to start with the 82 Topps traded Cal Ripken Jr., the quintessential Ripken Jr. rookie card. I mean, that was the first card of his that he was featured by himself as far as in Topps, and it came in the traded set, which was really hard to come by anyway. I mean, you pretty much had to get those from a local card shop, and for that young of an age, that was just a card that you just could not get your hands on. The next one, honorable mention, would be the 87 opening day Johnny Ray error card, which has actually got Barry Bonds' name on it. So this one here only came in the complete sets of 87 Donruss opening day, and there wasn't a guarantee that you were going to get this particular error card because they did correct it to where later on it actually had Johnny's name to go along with his picture. The next two for the honorable mention both come from 84 Fleer Update. That 84 Fleer Update set was amazing. Again, another one of those sets that someone in that age group, that time frame, you was not going to be able to afford. I did end up owning this set later in my adult life because that was always one of those that we just said, you know, if I could just have that 84 Fleer Update Clemens or that 84 Fleer Update Kirby Puckett or even Dwight Gooden, you know, my collection would be so great. But, so I did have to own it when I got old enough and when I could actually afford it. And then the final one for my honorable mention is going to be the 85 Topps Mark McGwire. Could definitely, easily make an iconic top 10 card of the 80s. The only reason I didn't put it in there, basically, is because, you know, while you were proud to have it at the time, in my opinion, it didn't hit iconic status until the home run race between him and Sammy Sosa. So that was one reason why I left it off there, because when I think back to when I was collecting the 80s, that wasn't one of the premium cards or the top cards that I'm looking for when I'm making trades and things of that nature with friends or with card shops or something like that. So these days, sure, I'll take a McGwire, especially if it's a nice fresh McGwire like what we pulled out of our vending box the other night in our live stream. If you watch those, two good examples of good McGwire cards come out of that. We'll gladly take PSA 9 or PSA 10 these days. But at the time, it just wasn't a card that we were really chasing. So those were my honorable mentions for top 10 most iconic cards of the 80s. So we're going to get right into this now with my number 10. My number 10 pick is the 1987 Donruss Greg Maddix. Great card. Great player. Great card of a great player. He had also a Fleer rookie card, and he had an 87 Topps traded rookie card. But this one here, it was in a lot of people's collections. And for me, one of the things that I remember the most about the 87 Donruss Maddix was this one in your collection was almost like buying power. This particular card got used a lot of times to make up low ends of a trade. So if you were trying to get a card from a buddy or from a card shop, and what you were trying to trade to them wasn't close enough to the value, a lot of times the Greg Maddix would get thrown in there on that trade. That may sound odd, but that's just the way I remember this card. I did like the card. I did have it in my collection for quite some time. But for me, it was more of a trading piece almost all the time. Now, anytime I come across one in somebody else's collection, I would pick it up because I knew that I was going to be able to trade it for something else that I would rather have. So the 87 Donruss rated rookie for me, that is my number 10 iconic card because of just the buying power that it had along with it at that time. So my number 9 is the 1987 Topps Bo Jackson. Now, this one here is not his Topps rookie card. The 86 Topps traded was his Topps rookie card. But again, that traded set you could only get in full factory form. You couldn't get them in packs. So for us who were collecting Bo Jackson back then, thinking that Bo was going to be just this phenomenal Hall of Fame star. And don't get me wrong, Bo was great, okay? But, with injuries and stuff, shortened his career, didn't quite have the Hall of Fame numbers that he would have needed. This one here was the one that we would have in our collection. So if you had 2 or 3 of these in your collection, whether they were in top loaders at the time, whether they were in a binder at the time, it was always really cool to have the Bo Jackson Future Star 87 Topps card in your collection. So that's why for me the Bo Jackson is the number 9 from the 1980s. The number 8, my number 8, I feel like could actually probably go up to high as maybe 6 or 5, but I chose it as number 8, and that is the 1983 Topps Tony Gwynn rookie card. This was a card that everybody wanted. You wanted this card in your collection. It was a good looking card. The colors on it were really nice, and there was just something about the 83 Topps Tony Gwynn that said you knew what you were doing when it come to collecting cards, and you took pride in your collection. And to have that one in there just kind of cemented that for some people that you were making trades with and whatnot, whether it be friends or whether it be local card shops. If they seen the 83 Topps Tony Gwynn, they knew you knew what you were doing. So this one is one that I did have a couple in my collection back when I was younger, and it was one that I was super proud of, and it was actually one that was really hard to get off of me. So this one here, for some reason or other, everybody wanted in their collection. My number 7, sorry about that, hit the wrong button. My number 7 is the 1985 Fleer Roger Clemens. Similar to the Tony Gwynn, the 85 Fleer Clemens just kind of told people, this guy knows what he's doing. This guy's proud of his collection. He wants that card in his collection that not a lot of people have. If you had a Roger Clemens rookie, there was a good chance it was the 85 Topps. Nothing wrong with that card either, by the way, or the 85 Donruss. But there was something about the gray border with the deep red color and the serious look on his face as he's fixing to deliver that pitch. There was something about this card. If it was in your collection, it just made your collection that much better. So, in my opinion, the number 7 of the top 10 iconic cards from the 80s is the 85 Fleer Roger Clemens. So, moving on. My number 6, this one here, again, could probably be placed higher. But for me, it came in at number 6, and that is the 82 Topps Cal Ripken Jr. rookie card. Cal Ripken, in my opinion, represented the 1980s when it came to baseball. Cal Ripken was just the person that came up in almost all conversations when it came to baseball because of the games played consecutive streak. There was just something about owning this card. Yeah, he had his 87 Fleer and he had his 87 Donners and the 82 Topps traded that we talked about earlier, but we was not going to be able to have the 82 Topps traded. This was the one that you wanted in your collection. So for me, this one here is my number 6 pick of the most iconic cards of the 80s. So moving on to number 5. Now this one here, these are where it starts getting a little tricky. When you start trying to pick out the top 5 iconic cards of the 80s, again, opinions are going to vary, but it gets really difficult to narrow the top 5 cards down. But for me, the number 5 iconic card of the 80s is the 89 Fleer Billy Ripken Air. This card sparked a lot of conversation, obviously in the collectible world, and even some in the non-collectible world, where people just could not believe that had actually happened, that was actually released. Somebody did not catch that, whatnot. The Billy Ripken Air card, for me, this is one that had to have in the collection when I was younger, and I did have it, but there was just something about being 14 years old and having this card that had that vulgar language on it that your parents knew about, and they obviously did not want you to say that word, but there it was, right there on something that we all loved and adored at that time was our baseball cards. And there it was. So one of the things that I think makes this card iconic is just due to the fact that it spawned 4 other versions of this card. And if it had to been for this one, those other 4 cards wouldn't have existed. So the most common one is the black border. That one also found in later packs and come in complete sets. But then you also had the black scribble, and then you had the white scribble, and then you had the complete whiteout version. So, I mean, the Billy Ripken card, everybody wanted it. So, for me, that is one of the cards that I definitely think of when I think of cards from the 1980s. And so that is why, to me, it is number 5 in our top 10 countdown. So we'll get the Ripkens off there. Number 4. Alright, so number 4 was tricky. I had issues on which one I wanted number 4 and which one I wanted number 5. But I chose as number 4 the 84 Donruss Don Mattingly. Don Mattingly, wow. I mean, what can you say? You either loved Don Mattingly or you hated Don Mattingly. You basically, if you weren't a Yankees fan, you pretty much hated Don Mattingly. Me being a Cardinals fan growing up, I did not have a lot of outlet to the American League, but you still knew the teams. You still obviously knew the Yankees. You knew who Don Mattingly was. And I personally never had issues with Don Mattingly. His cards were super collectible back in that time. And this one here, though, of his other rookie cards, this one here is the one that said, hey, you've got the best card from that set. That's the card that everybody wants when they go to look for Don Mattingly rookie cards. So for me, it definitely earned a spot in the iconic top 10 from the 1980s. And it's a great looking card. You know, that 84 Donner set is just classic. So, number 3. This one could easily be number 1. If it had to been for number 2 and number 1. That may go without saying. That may just make sense. That may have made too much sense. But this card here, even without number 1 and number 2, in a lot of cases, could be a lot of people's pick for the most iconic card of the 1980s. And that is the 1986 Donruss rated rookie Jose Canseco. When I think back about this card, number 1, I wanted it. Number 2, you couldn't find it. And number 3, if you did get a hold of it, that was one of the cards that did not come out of your collection. I mean, you would have had somebody make you a very lopsided trade just to be able to get this card out of your collection, especially when you're at that age and your baseball card collection meant that much to you. This is also the card that I first learned of counterfeit and what counterfeit was and what fake cards were, because this was the first time I'd ever heard anybody, say, watch out for fakes, watch out for counterfeits. And I'm thinking, I don't even know what you mean. And they're like, well, people are making fake, not real versions of this card, and they're passing it off as the real thing. This card was so collectible in the 80s, even in the early 90s, that there was a lot of fakes. So I definitely put this card in the top 3 iconic cards from the 1980s. And again, it could easily make number 2 or even number 1 on a lot of lists. So this one here was definitely one of my favorites. Okay, so it's time for number 2. So what is my number 2 and my number 1? Well, they both span pretty much the entire decade of the 80s. Our number 2, again, just like the Canseco, it could easily be considered the number 1 card of the 1980s as far as just like an iconic status. But for me, it was the 1980 Topps Rickey Henderson rookie card. Man, if this thing had come out in 79, would it have even meant as much to us than what it does that it come out in 1980? Now, there's lucky for you, by the way. For a lot of us in the decade of the 1980s, this Rickey Henderson rookie card was our Mickey Mantle. This is the one that we could not get a hold of, or if you did get a hold of it, the condition was horrible. Your corners were soft, or it was way off center, or way miscut, and that's just the way these cards were. So if you did have one in your collection, you were super proud of it, and it was definitely in a holder. A lot of time, this was the second card that I ever put in one of those massive 1-inch 4-screw lucite holders. So this is one that people were really proud of. For me, the Rickey Henderson card is the equivalent of, the Robin Yount or the Paul Molitor of the 75 set from the 1980. I mean, just great looking card, super hard to come by. And again, at a kid in that age in the 80s, if you had this card in your collection, it was just, it was a good collection. It was fun to look at. It was fun to show off. So this one here is number 2 for me in the iconic top 10 of the 1980s. And the number 1 card spans to all the way at the other end of the 80s, and I'm sure everyone right now watching this is saying the exact same thing, and here it is to confirm that you are correct. It is the 89 Upper Deck King Griffin Jr. Man, what more can you say? When you talk about iconic cards of the 1980s, this was the card. You know, it was the very first card in the very first Upper Deck release, and they made the hobby just, it turned it on its head, using the holograms, using the format that they used to print the cards, having that first baseline there on that right hand side of the card. It's just an amazing looking card. It was a great set, and for me, there's absolutely no other card that could even come close to topping the King Griffin Jr. 89 Upper Deck when you talk about the #1 card of the top 10 iconic cards of the 1980s. So, I'm sure everyone knew that that was going to be the one that it was. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have different opinions on the top 10 cards of the 80s, please leave it in the comments. If you have an idea of something that you would like to hear my opinions on a future Tuesday Top 10 or Top 10 Tuesday, whichever one I end up calling it, leave that in a comment, and I will do some research and see if I can come up with a video for that. But anyway, hope you enjoyed this one today. Lucky and I had a good time with this, and we will see you guys next time.